Welcome to part 8 of the tutorial series on how to create maps for UT2004. In this episode, we're going to talk about adding your own assets. So far, we've been either using the Honorable Tournament 2004 ones, or just not bothering with assetting at all. So, how do you go about that? Can be done in several ways. There are different ways to achieve the same thing. I won't be covering how to create textures, sounds, static meshes, and everything else. That's might be in a later uh, tutorial series that covers more the nuanced things that you need to know for modding slash mapping for this game. But today I'll just only show you how to get them in the editor, how to tweak a few things, and yeah, basically do that. So first thing I want to make sure everyone understands, do not under any circumstances modify the original files. So do not change any of these files that are in the game by default. By doing so, if you do, you will break compatibility with servers basically. So the files do not match. You get a version mismatch and you have to either reinstall the game or verify the game files on Steam. So once again, I highly advise you not to modify those. The second thing you want to keep in mind is do not create packages. We call these things packages basically, with a space in the name or like a weird character, with like maybe, I don't know what's a weird character, but try and find out, I guess. In the names, or save the files or import files, sorry. Um, the file that is being imported should not be in a folder that has a space or like a weird character in its name. So you can't have like test space one and then test and then the file you want. Then the editor will not be able to find it because there's a space in the first folder basically. So that will not work. Yeah, you should always save the files in the corresponding folder. So for example, I'll show you what I mean by that later on. There's also a package called myLevel. MyLevel is a internal package that you can't see, but it's basically embeds the assets right into the map file itself. So it can be handy if you have a few textures that you want to include in your map. It will, um, yeah, be easier to redistribute basically because you need to include one file. The only downside of my level is really that, yeah, you can't easily make use the same assets on different maps. You would need to extract them from my level and then put them into that my level. So that's why we use packages for this purpose basically, because it can be um, accessed by multiple maps basically, or like the whole editor basically. So it's not tied to one map per se. So let's start out by adding a texture. So there's a few things you need to know as well about textures. Textures need to be a power of 2. So 16 by 16 is the minimal texture size you can have. All the values like 64 by 128 will work, 256 by 256. But the maximum that you should go is 2048 by 2048. You can go slightly higher by 40, 60, 96 by 4096, I believe. But that's generally not advised at all because that size will be in the megabytes and your editor will most likely crash and the file cell will be enormous. So bigger areas should get 1024 or 2048 textures, and smaller details should be at maximum 512 by 512 or lower, ideally. And keep the uses of 2048 by 2048 textures as low as possible because they are quite expensive in terms of like memory usage. So the editor supports multiple imports types as well. You have PSX, I think it's like an Unreal thing or something, or like some other file, I believe. BMP, that's like OG basically. TGA or Targa, in a DDS file, direct draw service, or UPaint file. UPaint is something that apparently came with the engine one day, or with some releases, or maybe the Unreal Development Kit. But yeah, it's not really generally used. What you should use is DDS, direct draw service. It's the best format for UT2004. It's highly compressible. The compression is really good, basically. .tj/Taraga also works. It's a lossless format. It looks really good, but it's also twice as big. And if you compress DDS well enough, then you will not be able to see the difference at close up at all. So if you do decide to go DDS, then you should use DXT1 for non-alpha services, so non-transparent services basically, and DXT5 for services that require a alpha channel or have transparency in them. The minimum color is 8 bits for PCX, but ideally you just want to go 32-bit because, well, let's be honest, it's not really a big deal. You can go 24-bit if you want, but just go 32-bit basically. So yeah, let's actually import a texture now. So to do that, you go to the texture browser, file, and import. And I have some pictures in a folder. I'll just grab this one. And as you can see, a window pops up. For the package name, we'll just do test, but you should name it whatever you want. You can name the packets the same name as your level, or you can just name them more like general, something like dev textures or like stone textures or like something like that if you want to reuse them all, but it's up to you. So I'm going to use the name packets test. I will not make a group yet, but you can also group them in the editor itself. So let's say I will not make this one in a group. LOD you can leave as it is. Name you can change, so you can change how it's imported, what the name will be. So we'll just leave it at default. Generate map maps you should always leave on if possible. Map maps is just like a smaller version of your texture basically. This rendering method does not only increase FPS actually, but also reduce the shimmering on screen. If you would not have map maps and you have a really detailed texture, you will see like a lot of shimmering in the distance. Basically, it doesn't look nice. So leave it on. Masked is when your texture has a alpha channel or transparency layer. It's I don't know if it's necessarily faster, but it doesn't look as nice as a proper alpha, which is right here. But see if you can get away with masked, because I think it's cheaper to render than fully an alpha test. But this texture doesn't have any alpha, so we'll just go and continue anyway. You can do OK to import it. You can skip it, and if you can also add multiple, which I'll do later on. So I'm gonna press OK and have my texture here. So I'll do the other two now as well. So you can do multiple at the same time. I believe you can do up to 15 or 16, maybe slightly higher at the same time. And if you do above that number, just the engine will not, or the editor will not accept that basically. So I will place these two textures in a group called cool group. Leave everything as default. You can skip, you can do one by one, but I'm gonna do move to all. The group can't have spaces. That's correct. I ignored my own advisory early on. There we go. So you can do both at the same time, or you can do them one by one and then select textures or select some flags that you want to set manually. So you notice we only have one group. And that's correct because we only have one group. But where did the other texture go? Well, to see the non-group textures, you need to press the All button. And this will show all the textures regardless of the groups it's in. So there's also this little exclamation mark. If a texture is live, so it actually can move or rotate or whatever, this button would make it preview that in the editor basically. But since we only have static textures, we do not use it, or we don't have to use it. So So yeah, that's basically the workflow of importing them into the editor. Um, there are some properties that you can set. These are like animation stuff. You can tweak around with these, but from what I know, they don't really do anything. The service tag is these two were also available during import, the alpha and the masked, and the two-sided is not something I use at all, basically. The texture options are pretty nice. You have like texture details that you can use, but I'll probably discover or show you guys a different way of adding extra detail to a texture anyway. LOD set is something you should consider when you're importing textures. This way, when you change the in-game settings, if you set to world, if you change the world detail, then this texture will be scaled down. It will not be scaled down. It will be scaled down by the texture detail. But for example, if you set this to a player skin or a weapon skin, then if you change the character detail, then it will decrease in quality, not when you set the texture detail. And for example, if you have a crosshair texture that you obviously don't want to degrade when you go in lower textures, then you should set it to none or to interface. And these two one at the bottom you should ignore basically. And the rest kind of speaks for itself. So we'll just leave it at world. This one can be ignored as well. You can do some, you can change the resolution. So it's 512 by 512. You can set to 256, but I don't think it does anything to be honest. It might not. No, it doesn't seem like it. I'm pretty sure you can do something with that, but I personally never used it. And well, sorry, yeah, I missed one. This one you can also ignore. The surface, no, where is that? The material, sorry, that's the one. The material one is actually pretty nice. By default, it's default, but you can set it to quite a few custom material types. So what this does is when you set a texture to be metal, then when you walk on that surface, it will sound like metal and it will behave like metal. So that will show like sparks and everything else when you shoot it. If you set it to wood, it will sound like wood, and when you shoot at it, it will make some wood particles. So try to cover this as soon as you can, because if you have like 20 or like 500 textures already in, you don't want manually adding these tags. But yeah, they're nice. They do not always work, I think. The flash and the plant one don't, but the rest seems to work. And you can also add your custom ones, but I never managed to do that. So, but yeah, it's a nice feature to have, so you can change the way texture behaves. Okay, that's the default about how to import textures. So you can save the package and always make sure that it's .utx at the end, just like the rest, and then hit save. And now you can always open this file and start using it in your maps. Now we'll move on to static meshes. So in the old days, everything used to be made out of brushes, BSP or geometry. Nowadays, static meshes have become more favorable because they're superior rendering performance. And but the only downside is you need to make them in a 3D modeling software like Blender or 3ds Max. But yeah, you can get a lot more detail out of these meshes than with geometry. So to import a mesh, you have different formats. There's only two. There's the ASCII to scene format and there's the Lightwave files. But I suggest you always use the .ase/ASCII scene format to import into Unreal Tournament 2004. And why is that? Because there's a Blender plugin for this. I think 3ds Max, older versions of it might have support for it. I don't know about the newer ones. There's probably a plugin for it as well. But Blender has a plugin for that, and I will link that plugin in the description. If you ever do decide to import or use that plugin and create meshes for the game, always use set the export scale to 100%. So if I go into Blender, and, oh, I want the cube actually. So at export, you have the ASCII scene export here. And always make sure the scale is set to 100 here. Otherwise, it doesn't like look as nice, I would say. Because if you change a mesh that's already in game, in Blender, if you don't scale it up to 100% afterwards, it will not be the same size basically. So what I should suggest you do, always scale it by 100%. So so it looks even. So let's export this simple cube and then import it into our editor, into a package, static mesh, test, group, cool. And then same thing, you can skip, you can import them in bulk, or you can just do one, and there's our simple cube. There's a few things you can do here as well. There's a materials tab. We don't have a material, but we can just simply add one. Obviously, your mesh needs to be UV wrapped and everything else. Otherwise, it will not look nice, but that's something I won't cover. But you can assign materials here. If you use the exporter that I showed off earlier, and the textures are already open in the editor will link those textures automatically. And if not, you have to manually edit them or add them. There's a few other things here. There's some simple karma collision, simple line box collision, and simple line collision. Karma collision is the physics engine basically. So, and what the term simple means by this is if you go into view and show collision, there is basically none. So when there's no collision around it, it will use the mesh itself as the collision for the collision calculations. And now a simple box is pretty easy to calculate, but if you have a really complex mesh, then you should not be doing that. So I will explain why and how to make a collision mesh later. So you have simple box collision. This will just be the player interaction, so you can't move or jump on top of it, basically. It will block movement. Karma blocks your ragdoll when you die, and the simple box collision just prohibits movement and everything else. And simple line collision is basically, I believe it's gunfire and probably also projectiles, I believe. And you see that this one is set to false because, for example, if you have like a dome here and the collision box would be a cube, then the bullets would like fly off or hit the outside box instead of the actual mesh. So that's not something you want. And you can also set material collision on. Only set this on parts that are visible, and because it can be pretty expensive on pretty big models. I'll turn it on because it's a simple box. And you can set some collision volume around the mesh by going to collision tools and then choose one of these because it's a simple box. Well, let's use a simple box. Yes. And it's pretty hard to see, but there's like a yellowish mesh around it. Not yellow, it's more like purple or pinkish. It's really hard to see, but I think you can see it around here, I think. So it has like a collision around it now. Maybe I can show it in a different way. No, you can't. Okay, that's fine. So this is basically just a sort of volume around the box that things can interact with basically. So if you have a simple mesh, you might not even need to do that, but if you have like a complex mesh, then you should do that for sure. To speed up the collision calculations because it needs to be, if it's done per pixel or per vertex, which is quite expensive, then the game might lag. And for size reasons, because saving all that collision data is quite expensive as well. So try and mess around with this, see what you can get away with. But yeah, I think, for example, this is a better example. So I grab one of the main ones from the game. So anything that touches this wireframe gets stopped, basically. And you can see that, so Karma, so your ragdoll will hit the wireframe. Your bullets will not, because it's set to false. So it will actually hit, your bullets will actually hit the mesh, but your movement will also be blocked by these wireframes, box, slash, whatever around it. And this way it's a lot faster to calculate collisions and everything else. Yeah, do not create like really complex models. It depends on who you ask, but I would say 5 to 6,000 triangles for a mesh will be more than enough. You gotta keep in mind that we're still working with an engine and tech from 2004. Sure, you can push 10k polygons or triangles easily, but I don't think the engine will really appreciate that. But then again, experiment with that whatever you want. So, and see what you can do with it. And we'll move on to the last thing, and that's sounds. So you can do a few things. You can actually play a sound, or you double click on it. The same thing, you can also add groups. So it's basically all the same. To import sounds, you need a WAV file or a WAV. That's also called, I think. And I have a WAV file somewhere. Cheese by May. Cheese. I import that. And that should be somewhere. Or did it not save correctly? Give me a second. It has one channel, 16-bit. It should work. Import. But it does not. Okay, that's weird. Quick check why it doesn't. Um, 44, 16-bit, yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, this is a classic example why it doesn't work, because this has a space in it. And it's weird because sometimes it does work. As you've seen before, we were able to import texts before from the same folder, but yeah, sometimes it just bugs out. So new folder, cheese, and now it should work. There we go.
Cheese.
And you have cheese. So one thing to keep in mind, it needs to be a WAV file, .wav. Use 2200 or 4400 kilohertz for the sampling rate. 48 kilohertz is possible, but the quality increase is not really it's probably noticeable, but it also needs some more space on the disk. Save it as 16-bit audio. 24 or 32 is not supported, and it needs to be mono. The engine simply does not support stereo. It does some trickery to make it sound better than it is. I don't know how it does it, but it sure does make up for it. But the file itself needs to be mono. Otherwise, it will not play. There's a few things you can do here. You can also make a group. I don't know what it was. Test. Procedural sounds. One sec. Test 2. Yeah, this one. So sound group can be used to group multiple sounds together. So if you have like gunfire sounds that deviate slightly, instead of having to assign them one by one in the edit or in the code. You can just add them to this group, and then they will play from time to time. So if I have a sound here, which I'm gonna add, yeah, if you don't do don't do what I just did, and add the sound group to itself, because well, that doesn't end well. So let's quickly grab it back. And let me quickly in the background see if I can grab a new sound to add. I don't want to open, I want to import. So let's add cheese again. Cheese.
Cheese.
Cheese. And I'll probably add this one. So I open Audacity. Throw that in there. Export it as a wave. 44-100 kilohertz. Mono 60-bit PCM. And then save it in the new folder. Save. Shit. One sec. Export audio. Downloads. New folder. Save. Mono. Export. And then import it. Amogus. Nice and loud. Sorry for that. So let's actually turn it down slightly, otherwise I will do it again, probably. Um, producer, produceral sound. No clue what it actually is. Doesn't seem to work either. Sound groups, like I said before, is nice if you want to play variations of sound instead of one sound. Let's name it test. Properties. Add. And then make sure you actually select the sound, otherwise you'll get a crash. And you say cheese as well. And the likelihood per sound, I think you can set 1 to 1. So so yeah, it's a bit random basically. I believe you can set the likelihood to something else. I don't know. There is something you can do with that. Um, I'm not 100% sure how it actually works, but you can change this. But yeah, a good example, I don't think I have of it. Yeah, I think I do. I think the player sounds have it. Yeah. Or does it not? I'm pretty sure they have. They also use them here, I think. Maybe need to load the actual player sounds. Indoor ambience. Oh, it's probably the footsteps. Yeah, this is a better example. So the footsteps use different sounds, and you, as you heard, they vary from time to time. And I don't know why the procedural, what that actually does, but yeah, that's some things you can tweak in there. I suggest you look online um, how that stuff works, but like I said, I have never used it. Might be useful or it might not, no idea. But yeah, try and poke around with that. So yeah, that will basically do it. You can import textures now, static meshes, sounds into your own packages for you to use on your maps. I skipped the actor classes because you can't import an actor basically. You need to compile that to make it visible. Meshes are not something that's used at all. You can't even import them. Animations, Yeah, technically you can place them on a map, but it requires some work, and animations are more used for like modifications like mods or other things. It's not really used for mapping at all. I might cover a modding tutorial later on, but first let's cover all the mapping stuff that I know. Static meshes we covered as well. We also covered like what the collision stuff down here does and how to assign a material. Prefabs is not used. No idea what it does. Groups is something for later on. Sounds we just covered, and the music doesn't even work at all, I believe. No, it's like a UMX file, so you can't even use that. So, all right. Um, yeah, that will do it for this tutorial. So you now have a basic idea of how to import your own stuff. And in the next tutorial, in the next episode, we're gonna talk about how to optimize your map. So we all done basically the basic things. Hey, you might have a map, you maybe zone it off, you have some static meshes to it, and other kinds of stuff. But now it's actually time to optimize your map. And once we cover that, we will move on to the advanced section of this tutorial series, which will be a separate playlist as well. So thank you all for watching and hope to see you next time.